I be the great champion, a grouchy tiger drinking and lip-syncing war songs from a youth spent jousting and spinning with my twin, my namesake. 30 years on, I'm still fighting the same hate, wrestling inner shadows, trying to integrate personal demons, having total recall of simulated tribal dances, dimly lit house parties, surrounded by cut heads, boxes, bubble butts, and dreads. Our fake silk shirts and polyester dashikis were a symbol of black history's true meaning. We ain't them, and I think they look down on us. Any bond we might have had is slain by distance and time, and like our shackles exist now, only in our minds. I be the great champ. Husband, provider, protector, daddy. I'm all these things and more, but rarely myself, sadly. So many hats struggling for space on my weary head, like salt and pepper, competing to see who can push me closer to the edge. But I ain't gonna give an inch. I ain't gonna take a mile either. You see, I build things and blow loads that explode through the ether. I raise chillin' and stay seeking freedom. And that's why I be the great champion. Taxed, dissed, and deplorable. It seems like smiles always come with tears for fears unknowable. So many pastimes and fast times, but only a few memories to show for them. I'm not just a slave to the rhythm, I'm a slave indeed. Skinned, fleeced, and fleeing those who would steal my peace. Working steadily for causes while unsure of my own beliefs. Swimming against the mainstream media, siren singing. I'm tired of bringing my A game while others come with excuses and hand wringing. I'll tell you right now, you can stop marching and singing. We shall overcome, because we have seen the enemy. And he is us, my son. Heartbeat pounding like the drums of war, son. Me and my clique got more brains and more guns. You don't wanna test us, we love liberty. I'm not afraid to die, my ideas outliving me. Eyes closed, third eye shine, help me envision the inevitable victory over my enemies. I don't know why they oppose me. Hey, what's going on, party people? Robert Jenkins here. I want to welcome you to another episode of the North Star Podcast. This is the first episode of the new year, so I would be remiss if I didn't say Happy New Year to you. This is January 1st, 2020. I am not sitting in the seat perilous. I'm actually some ways away from the seat perilous, sitting over here in the recording studio, part of Moon Mind Productions. And having been off today and had a little downtime, I actually decided to try something of a little, just a little fun experiment. And I recorded a poem called Great Champion, and actually put it to some musical backing that I composed a while ago using my trusty machine, as they call it, machina, some people say. Anyway, of course, you know, when I normally do a poem on the North Star Podcast, I always break it down for you and explain what I meant by it. I think the preachers call that exegesis when you analyze a text. Well, this ain't no holy text, but I'm gonna see, can I perform a little exegesis nonetheless? Let me go ahead and pull it up here so I can actually see what I'm talking about. But again, the poem was called Great Champ or Great Champion. And that concept of the great champion is a concept that was, as far as I know, was first put forth or promulgated by two authors named Howe and Strauss. Strauss and Howe, I think their names were. And they have a book called The Fourth Turning. And these guys really, they study how civilizations and history, how civilizations evolve and struggle through history, and how they change over time. And they likened the struggle and change of societies over time in history to really a long human being lifespan. So for about 80 years, they call it a seculum. That's that period of 80 years of a long human life. And they noticed that societies or civilizations or countries kind of behave or go through similar cycles or phases to human beings during that seculum or 80-year period. And they go through what would basically boil down to an infancy, a youth, a young adulthood, and an old age, a middle age, and an old age, and divided up into four periods though. And each one of those age or periods corresponds to a character that they have kind of devised to kind of illustrate the principles or properties of that particular age that the society is going through. And they kind of anthropomorphize it a little bit or make it, relatable as a human being. So anyway, that gray champion is one of those characters or one of the characteristics of the ages that societies go through. And a fourth turning is when a society goes through an infancy and it goes through a young adulthood, a middle age, and then an old age. And that old age, it is marked by, it's leading up to the fourth turning when that society is going to have a violent, tumultuous period of time. And it's going to turn and become something new, a new version of that same society. And each society exhibits those turning points, the fourth turning, they're called. So anyway, the Gray Champion, the name of this poem, I got it from that whole concept put forth by those authors in the book, The Fourth Turning. And the Gray Champion is kind of a throwback figure who comes from usually a silent generation. And I'm Gen X myself, so we are a silent generation, although I don't think we're technically the right generation to be gray champions. So a gray champion is somebody who comes from the past into a tumultuous period in society, and they provide leadership and a grounding and fire to help fuel the society, to help them push through that fourth turning into becoming something new and better. So that's generally my takeaway from the book, and that's where I use that name, Gray Champion. Also, in a lighter sense, I'm a gray champion because every day when I look in the mirror, I'll be danged if I don't see a little more gray somewhere. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of a play on words. But anyway, I'm talking about my youth in the first verse here, and some of the memories that I had coming from like around 1989, back when we used to jam songs like Slick Rick, Teenage Love, and Keith Sweat, Make It Last Forever, and How Deep Is Your Love, and Guy, and all that stuff like that. Of course, all the golden age hip hop. And I'm thinking about some of those house parties that we went to. I say I'd be the Gray Champion or Grouchy Tiger, drinking and lip syncing war songs from a youth spent jousting and spinning with my twin. I had a homeboy named Robert, so we were namesakes, Robert and Robert, although I went by Bobby at the time. But he and I used to go to these house parties. In the poem, I refer to it as tribal dances, simulated tribal dances. And we'd be at these little darkly, dimly lit house parties, spinning around, doing that old athletic kid and play type dancing. You know what I'm saying? You got to do the kick spin and all that stuff. But of course, we was putting our own little thing to it. And if you look at Big Daddy Kane's videos, you see all these cut heads. Those are the dancers. I call them cut heads in the background because they got the boxes with the little cuts on them. They back there spinning and doing their thing with the little polyester silk shirts on or whatever they were, little simulated African dashikis. And I said, interesting enough, those shirts kind of symbolize what I would consider now to be the true history of African history, or African American history, because it almost seems like we have a simulated bond with Africa. We've been American so long that, to me, it's really not accurate to call us African people. We say it out of sentimentality, and we are African descendant people, but we are Americans. We're Black Americans as far as I'm concerned. And the reason I say that is because I've seen a lot of Africans and I interacted with my share of them, and there always seems to be a rift or a divide between Black people in America and Africans from Africa. From, Nigeria. I've met people from Nigeria, met people from Zimbabwe, a couple other places on the continent. That's our continent. Well, usually when people say the continent, they talk about Europe, but I'm saying the continent from which life originates. But anyway, even though that's an illustrious history, and I'm not ashamed of Black history or anything like that, I'm saying that when I dispassionately look at the way African Americans and Africans interact, there really doesn't seem to be much of a bond between us. And I think one of those reasons, from what I've seen, many Africans have a victor mentality. They think they can do anything, and they come over here and get it done. That's why you look at, if you look at the statistics, one of the highest earning groups in America is, I think it's the Nigerians. They come over here and actually out earn native Black folks in America. Also, a lot of the Bahamians, people from the Bahamas, tend to have that victor mentality. They come up here and out earn and outproduce us, even though we've lived here all our lives. You know what I'm saying? They overcome great distances, travel, hardship, and language barriers, come to this country and outperform us Black people, or we black folks who are already native to this country, essentially. So anyway, there's a divide between us. Whatever the cause of that divide, it's there. And that's why I say we ain't them. And I think they look down on us because they have, so many of them that I've met have a victim mentality, whereas we have a victim mentality. And I think that may be one of the reasons for that divide. Anyway, that's I summarize it by saying any bond that we may have had is slain by distance and time, and like our shackles exist now only in our mind. So yeah, next verse starts out, I be the great champ, husband, provider, protector, daddy, all these things, but rarely myself, sadly. So I think any parent and any spouse, anyone who's a parent and a spouse, kind of understands that nowadays, man. Like you spend so much time giving of yourself to your family and your kids, your wife, your husband, whatever the case may be, that sometimes you lose yourself. You don't get a chance to be yourself. And that's kind of that's the season that I was going through in much of 2019 due to changes in employment situations and super long commutes and stuff like that. So I felt like all I was doing is working and being daddy and not getting a chance to be myself, sadly. So that's what I'm referring to there. I said there's so many hats struggling for space on my weary head, salt and pepper competing to see who can push me closer to the edge. Of course, those are all allusions to, golden age hip hop or golden era hip hop. But at the same time, going back to that thing where I'm getting older and I see all this salt and pepper on me. Every time I look around, I see a little more salt mixed in with the pepper. I'm like, oh man, kind of tells you where you're at in life. Sometimes it's a cool thing. Sometimes you feel a little sad or you don't know how to feel about it. You know what I'm saying? But such as it is. Going down, I say that's why I be the great champ peon, and that's a divided word there, dividing champion and making it into champ peon, because I do feel like middle class people are essentially peons. We're not as free as we think we are. We're not as free as we've been told to think of ourselves as being. We're peons, essentially. In fact, I say I'm a slave to the rhythm and a slave indeed. Tax, dissed, and deplorable. And the reason I say that is because it seems like the harder I work, the more money comes out of my check, the harder it is to get ahead. And I start realizing that we're not free, because how can you be free if you are paying ridiculous taxes that you never actually agreed to pay? There's no contract that I signed anywhere that says I need to pay 25-30% of my paycheck for stuff that I don't even agree with half the time. To me, that's not free. I would define freedom as the condition of being able to handle or dispose of one's self and one's property in any manner that one sees fit without outside interference. And that's what I would call freedom. And if you're looking at that definition of freedom, then it's hard to say we have it. How are you going to be free when if you buy a house and pay it off, for example, you pay your house completely off, but if you don't pay taxes every year, they come take it and bulldoze it? How is that free? I mean, how is that free when they're debating about things like gun control? How you going to take somebody's means of defense? How you going to outlaw something that is nothing but a piece of property? Now, these are why I say I feel like a champion sometimes. I'm definitely swimming against the mainstream media siren singing. For this new year on the North Star podcast, I'm going to try to point out a lot of what President Trump calls fake news. But I like to look at it like Malcolm X. My boy Malcolm X used to call it tricknology. That was the original phrase that I always used to use for it. And we're going to start delving into that quite a bit this year over the next few months and coming weeks. Talking about things that really are tricknology, fake news, the mainstream media's narrative that they push that has no bearing or nothing to do at all with reality, but that's what they talk about all the time. And most people seem to believe it. Just another sign and symptom of the fact that we are not as free as we think we are. At the last of the poem there, at the end there, I talk about I'm tired of bringing my A game while others come with excuses and hand wringing. I say you can stop marching and singing. We shall overcome because we have seen the enemy and he is us, my son. So what I meant by that was, again, touching on one of the themes that you see throughout this whole poem, we as African Americans, black people in this country, we labor under a lot of what I would consider to be delusions. One of them is that racism is this huge, ugly monster that's, keeping us all down and downtrodden. And the simple fact is, when you analyze the thing dispassionately, meaning when you step back a bit and be honest, we're keeping ourselves down for the most part. I can't I can't tell how it's not just us. Yes, there is racism. Yes, there are racists, but they are not people by and large who are in a position to cause the failure of our whole race. They are not the people who are in any way capable of keeping us down or keeping us occupying the low strata that we so often seem to be on. Now, also, I'm a realist, so I'm looking at that and saying, yes, there are some things that we need to get better, but I think on the whole, black people are we're reaching our peak. We're starting to come into ourselves. One of the ways that we're going to have to, or one of the things that we're going to have to do to fully come into ourselves is to start thinking for ourselves and start realizing that sometimes when you point the finger, as I've said before, at somebody else, racism, you got three pointing back at you. And the faster we deal with these three fingers pointing back at us, all the signs and symptoms and all the cultural rot that we have in our own culture, all of the negative influences that dwell within our community. The sooner we start taking care of those things, the sooner we can rise and truly take our place. But I think that we are head and shoulders above where we used to be, and I think it's silly to be, like I said, every time I look at most liberal black commentators, they act like it's still slave patrols running around looking for tall, light-skinned, knock-kneed mulattoes. You know what I'm saying? That's a reference to Crispus Attucks. That's how they described him on his wanted poster. Crispus Attucks was one of the first people who fell in defense of liberty in this country. He was a runaway slave, a runaway enslaved African, I should say. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep into the stuff. Actually, I do, but we're just getting a little close to time here. So I want to thank y'all for tuning in. I hope you found this poem interesting and entertaining. I'm going to try to keep more of that coming. I got some guests that I'm going to try to get on the show that are going to be interesting and informative. I want to wish y'all, again, a happy new year, a happy 2020. I want y'all to keep struggling and striding toward the North Star, towards freedom. And I also want to bid you 2 digits.